with our calculations on the human population growth, for example, that were mentioned earlier. No doubt the impacts of agriculture, particularly what's termed intensive agriculture, will be prominent in the debate. We can be sure that also farmland and farmland biodiversity will also be a key issue during the upcoming CAP reforms from 2013 onwards, with the question of if and how farming may be paid for ecosystem services in the future will be required to help meet EU policy objectives. So I think it's very timely that we have this session here today, and I'm very pleased to chair it. With no further ado, I'd like to hand over to our first presenter this morning. That's Dr. Michael Riffel from Riffcon, who's going to give you a presentation, particularly some information behind our agriculture and biodiversity leaflet from ECPA. Thanks, Michael.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the invitation, for the possibility to present a little bit of our contribution. We contributed to the compilation of 2 brochures on biodiversity and agriculture. The first brochure you might be aware of was released last year. The second edition was printed this year. It focuses on one component of biodiversity that is a visible part of biodiversity that people like, farmland birds. And the second one you'll find on your table is released quite recently. We work together here with ECPA and with ELO, European Landowners, and with ECON, a small company. Some general statements at first on agriculture and biodiversity. Agriculture shapes much of our land, as you might be aware of course. 50% of the European Union is made up of agricultural land. Biodiversity is critical to agriculture. Without biodiversity, we would have no agriculture. And agricultural lands are dynamic. Only a very few species can cope with the in-field environment. Imagine plowing, sowing, growing, harvest, plowing again. So the biodiversity needs some space within the agricultural landscapes. And the influences on the agricultural land are complex. We have socio-economic parameters such as, for example, farmers going for the best cash crop. We need this later when I come to talk about the farmland birds. We have governments imposing set-aside schemes that also have some influences on the farmland biodiversity. And we have external variables. Friedhelm Schmiede already talked about climate change. We have the invasion of diseases, the invasions of pest organisms. And agriculture requires land. So the land on this planet devoted to agriculture, or potentially available for arable land, according to various sources, we summarized here a graph from different sources, is 3.4 billion hectares. Currently, is 1.5 billion hectares is under cultivation. The delta in between is made up of natural habitats. That's where the biodiversity is, and of course, pastures, land devoted to grow cows. We face a continuous loss of arable land every year due to soil depletion, due to erosion, due to salinization, desiccation, etc. And we face an increasing demand for arable land, as Friedhelm Schmiede already outlined. There's more and more land is needed to feed the population, and with the ongoing demands for biodiesel and fiber, etc., there will be no less arable land needed for the future. So where this line intersect, we have an area of impossibility. There's not enough land to feed the population, and this is not in the very far future. This is in the very near future. We indicated this by depicting here the lifetime of a child born today. So we will see, we all see the intersection of the lines here. So what to do? Cut down human population. It might be a difficult one. Extending the arable land into the natural habitats, the remaining natural habitats. This will mean the end of biodiversity. And a number of well-known authors argue that intensification is the key parameter. There might be other possibilities: improvement of farm-to-fork efficiency, change human diets so that we'll all go for grain. So what about biodiversity? If we intensify the land, what is biodiversity? So in a nutshell, biodiversity is seen as a variability among living organisms from all sources, from genes to ecosystem, anything what lives. However, if I look into the auditorium, everybody of you might have his own definition and perception of biodiversity, as a farmer does, and as, for example, a birdwatcher does. Birdwatchers enjoy this beautiful European roller. A farmer enjoys earthworms that provide him with fertility of his soil and ensures productivity. But whatever the perception is, biodiversity is seen essential for agriculture, because biodiversity provides ecosystem services. So I will not go into detail now, because I'm a little bit in a hurry. I prepared for more than 30 minutes. So ecosystem services are the services provided for the ecosystem, for the welfare or for the benefit of mankind. Ecosystem services provide food, water, energy, pharmaceuticals, raw material, also maybe for pesticides. There are molecules in there, regulating climate control, disease control. And the third category is the supporting ecosystem services that support food production, water holding capacity, etc. And there is a cultural aspect. People just enjoy ecosystem services, enjoy nice landscapes, enjoy birds, enjoy flowers, butterflies. Of course, they don't enjoy mosquitoes and ticks and things like that, which are also part of biodiversity. That's not perceived as such. So the first three categories are so-called functional biodiversity, which is essential for agriculture. So the central challenge for this century will be to meet the agricultural production goals and also ensure biodiversity conservation at the same time. And this applies in particular for Europe, and often at the same place. Outside Europe, for example in the tropics, it's very difficult to preserve biodiversity within highly intensive agricultural land. So the impacts of agriculture on biodiversity are well known. With the onset of agriculture several thousand years ago, I'm talking now about Central Europe or Europe, lands have been cleared, habitats have been created. That meant an increase of biodiversity, and we had an element-rich agricultural landscape. The increasing agricultural practice, intensification, took out the elements from the element-rich agricultural landscape, and we ended up with an element-poor agricultural landscape, which meant a decrease in biodiversity. The same will happen if you abandon agricultural land, because succession will follow, and elements will also disappear from the element-rich agricultural landscape. We will have a climate vegetation, for example, in Europe, closed deciduous forests. So the central challenge will be how to restore or maintain biodiversity and intensify agricultural practice. That's the challenge. So outside of Europe, and this is a picture from the soybean belt of Mato Grosso in Brazil, where we have, in this forest, we have more than 550 species of birds, and I talk about birds as flagship species, as representatives for, or indicators for biodiversity, because birds go for insects, and with a bird you have tremendous numbers of insects behind the bird. So in the soybean fields, there's not a single bird, because in Brazil, for example, birds didn't have thousands of years of time to adapt to agriculture. It's simply nothing there. And on the other side, in the forest, you have hundreds of birds. So increasing yields means to avoid further encroachment of, for example, soybeans into these beautiful forests. In Europe, the situation is a bit different because we have a farmland biodiversity community, talking about birds. We have bird species that originally came from steppes and today live in agricultural land. They're considered farmland birds. And on a regional basis, and I'm going to present some examples, it's possible to restore farmland biodiversity by simply changing or modifying management practices. So talked a little bit about farmland birds. Farmland birds, or birds, are the organism group that is best understood, best researched of all organism groups. Species are well understood. We have data on ecology, on biological demands, etc. for every European species at least. Birds are mobile, they fly around, they are highly responsive to environmental changes on the positive and on the negative side. So you can easily measure if your management modification works. And birds, as I already mentioned, can act as flagship species. They stand for a whole community of weeds, of seeds, of arthropods, and without the weeds, seeds, and arthropods the birds feed on, there would be no birds. And not only in the UK, also in the meantime in other parts of Europe, there are thousands of bird watchers, volunteers, walking around, collecting, gathering data, and this data, in the meantime, is